Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni Viewer, here with a little unscripted video about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, I'm sure most of you are already going to see this anyway because, one, it's a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, and those are big event movies every year, and two, it's a Guardians of the Galaxy movie, and Guardians of the Galaxy is the biggest Marvel thing recently. Well, maybe not the biggest, but certainly one of the most beloved. And anyway, I'm sure you're going to see it, but I'm sure you also would like to know how good it is, and specifically what I thought of it, which is why I'm here. So, going in, I think I should say, really did like the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. I pretty much consider it my favorite of the whole MCU. Not that I think any lesser of any of the others, but I like it the most out of all of them because I guess it's just so different. I mean, it embraces that comic book weirdness, if you will. The Marvel movies prior to that had tried to keep things pretty grounded in a sci-fi. Yes, it's still out of the realm of what is really plausible, but still technically science-based kind of science fiction. Even when it came to introducing the Norse gods, they couldn't just go right out and say, these are the Norse gods. No, they had to do some sort of ancient aliens, what you call magic is actually really advanced science kind of thing. So, which, you know, nothing against that, they made it work, but it felt like they were kind of over-explaining it. But Guardians of the Galaxy comes along, here's a tree that can only say 3 words, and here's a raccoon that has cybernetic enhancements and shoots big freaking guns. You know, that's the world this is in, or galaxy, if you will. And it made no apologies for any of that weirdness, and people accepted it. Because, you know, what a novel idea. What people had accepted for years in the comic books, they will accept when it comes to the movies. Go figure, right? But yeah, the original movie is my favorite. And I think it's a lot of other people's favorites too. They certainly count it pretty high up there. And I also want to say that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 had a lot riding on it. Certainly far more than the first Guardians movie did. A lot of people were expecting the first Guardians to be a failure, mostly based on the fact that it was supposed to be weird and it was based on characters that even hardcore Marvel fans had never heard of. And, I mean, but you know, people were expecting it to be a failure, but it didn't turn out to be. If it had turned out to be a failure, it would have just been one of those Marvel things where they said, well, we tried and we failed, we'll just write that one off and pretend it never happened. Kind of like what they did with Incredible Hulk, except not. We can discuss Hulk another time. But however, now they have a sequel, and the sequel does have expectations. Like, the only expectation people had with the first movie was that it would fail. Now, people are expecting this one to be good. And I do think a very, very cynical argument, which I do not myself endorse, could be made that the only reason people liked the first one was because they were expecting it to fail. And, you know, you're expecting something to be a disaster and it doesn't turn out to be, you could potentially go too far in the other direction and say it turned out great. Like I said, I don't believe that myself, because I never expected Guardians to be a disaster. But anyway, now that you're expecting something to be great, if it doesn't surpass the original, does that mean you could go too far and say that it was worse? Which does happen. I kind of think that's what happened with Iron Man 2, if I'm being perfectly honest. It did not surpass the original Iron Man, and therefore it was counted as lesser than. But I have a different video planned for that. You'll just have to wait and see. But anyway, the question is, does that happen with Guardians Volume 2? And I am pleased to say it does not. This movie really does manage to be good. Does it manage to surpass the original? In some ways, I would say it's mostly equal with the original, but there are certain things it does differently. Like, clearly this one has a bigger budget, I will say, because there's a lot more that's going on. I mean, not that Guardians of the Galaxy Part 1 had a small budget, but you do, like, after seeing the second movie, you kind of think back and you think, well, we didn't actually see a lot of the spaceships actually traveling through space, or, like, we didn't see much in the way of actual planets. We only saw, what, that barren world Morag at the very beginning, and Xandar, and then the rest were just interiors of spaceships and the mining colony and nowhere. But, you know, otherwise there wasn't that much to seeing spaceships flying around and seeing a vast, interesting space environments. But Volume 2, they show a lot more of that. And it's not really for a, oh, hey, look, we've got more money, so now we're doing all this crazy stuff kind of thing. They make it actually relevant, like particularly with Ego and the environment of that world. It's not a spoiler that Ego's in it. You must have heard that by now. So I'll talk about him in a minute, but first let me finish this thought. So yeah, there's more of the actual ships sailing through space, more shots of different worlds. Won't necessarily go into detail as to how, because there are some surprises in there. And it makes for a far more interesting movie visually. Like, this is by far the most colorful of all the Marvel movies ever. Like, it is bright. Not to the point where it's garish, but it is bright. Like that weird octopus monster thing they fight in the beginning, that it is the opening scene. Every time that thing roars, rainbows come out of its mouth, literally. So when you open with that, of course you're gonna get a very colorful movie. And like I said, it's not gaudy, it's not, "Ugh, my eyes, what kind of horrible kids show is this?" kind of thing. It's a perfectly tolerable level of bright and colorful. Like a comic book, again. I said I'd talk about Ego, because he's the new big character, and the primary, I guess it goes without saying, primary antagonist. If you know anything about the comics, you know Ego's a villain. And he's a really good one in this. Like, that's the common complaint with these Marvel movies, that the villains are the least interesting part. Which there's a reason for it. The movies are generally more interested in the heroes and their journey, and the villains are usually therefore treated as the obstacles. Sort of the inverse of Batman, if you will, where usually it focuses on the villains and Batman's the obstacle. But he's DC, we're not talking about him. So, that the same counted for Guardians Part 1, where Ronan the Conqueror was, I mean, it's not that he was a bad villain. It's not that any of them are really bad villains. They're just not as developed as the heroes. That's the thing. They are far more straightforward, far simpler, most of the time. I mean, every now and then you get an Ultron or Loki or one of those guys, or if you jump into Netflix, say the Kingpin on the Daredevil series. But otherwise, the really, really good villains are rare. And Ego is one of those really, really good villains. Because there's a personal element. Again, is it a spoiler to say, just in case you've been keeping away from all of the trailers and ads and whatnot, I won't go into too much detail. Maybe I'll make a separate spoiler video. In fact, I probably will. But his connection to the heroes is more than just, I am the big bad obstacle that needs to be stopped. There's more to it, and that's the key. he's not just the obstacle. It's not just us versus them. It's more intricate. He is a good, complex, interesting, wish I could see more of him kind of villain. And he's definitely one of the more satisfying ones. I don't think many people will be complaining about Ego when it comes to terrible villains in the MCU. And of course, there are the returning characters. I mean, how do they fare? Again, they fare quite well. Each of them goes through more. There is actual character development. That's always important. Sometimes, there's the risk that characters will just either be stale or that development will be confused with makes bad decisions and, not just bad decisions, but stupid decisions, if you know what I mean. But with this movie, there is actual logical character development, in a believable way. You can believe that this would actually happen. It feels natural. You think, yeah, I can see these are the same characters who are continuing to take those steps forward. And when it comes to that second option of making characters just making stupid decisions to move the plot forward, like Tony Stark giving out his address to the Mandarin in Iron Man 3. Yes, stupid decisions are made in this movie, but I don't think they're counterintuitive. They don't ruin the characters per se. I don't want to get into spoilers, but they make sense, I think. In a lot of ways, they make sense. They too feel natural and believable. And yeah, otherwise it's just fun to see all of them again. Star-Lord, Gamora, Drax, Rocket, and Baby Groot. Baby Groot is adorable, by the way. I think everyone's going to be loving on Baby Groot. It's just great to see them all again. It feels like a triumphant return, if you will. And I also think another key component, this movie is funny. The Marvel movies have generally had a good sense of humor. This movie, I think, is slightly funnier than the original. And it also has good drama to it as well. Yeah, that's another key component for these things. Balancing good comedy with good drama to mesh together and form a Marvel movie. That's a very distinct style they have. Thus far, at least, until more and more people start copying them, assuming they will. I'm sure they have. I can't see every movie in a year. But, yeah, you won't be disappointed. That's the long and the short of it. You will not be disappointed by Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I mean, you might think it's better. Most of you will probably think it's equal to the original. And either one is good. I personally think it's equal, maybe slightly edging it out in certain areas, but otherwise, Guardians of the Galaxy still continues to be my favorite part of the MCU. And pardon the cars going by, I'm sorry. But I'm wrapping this up anyway. So yeah, those are my thoughts. If you've seen it, what do you think? Feel free to leave your thoughts below, you know the drill. In the meantime though, more stuff to do, and Omni Viewer's work is never done. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer, signing off.